The alarm screamed at 6:30 a.m., same as every morning for the past 3 years. Sarah Chen rolled over in her cramped San Francisco studio, her body feeling like she'd been hit by a truck despite 8 hours in bed. The fitness tracker on her wrist cheerfully announced she'd gotten adequate sleep, but her reflection in the bathroom mirror told a different story. Puffy eyes, skin that looked gray under the harsh LED lights, a waist that seemed to expand no matter how many spin classes she endured. At 34, Sarah had tried everything. Keto, intermittent fasting, CrossFit at dawn, meal prep Sundays that left her exhausted before the week even began. Her kitchen counter looked like a supplement store had exploded. Protein powders, fat burners, sleep aids, probiotics. Each promised to be the missing piece, the final solution to feeling human again. But standing in her kitchen that Tuesday morning, watching steam rise from her oversized coffee mug while scrolling through emails on her phone, something shifted. Her neighbor, Mrs. Tanaka, 82 years old, was visible through the window, moving through what looked like slow-motion dance in her tiny garden. The elderly Japanese woman had the kind of posture Sarah remembered having in high school, before years of hunching over laptops had rounded her shoulders into permanent defeat. Mrs. Tanaka noticed Sarah watching and waved, then gestured toward her kitchen window. She held up a small ceramic bowl, so tiny it could have been a child's toy, and pointed to her flat stomach with a smile that radiated contentment rather than smugness. Sarah's phone buzzed with another urgent email. Her marketing director job at a tech startup meant constant crisis management, energy drinks disguised as meetings, and lunch eaten standing over her keyboard. She'd gained 15 pounds since the promotion, despite working out harder than ever. Her doctor had started using words like metabolic syndrome and stress hormones, with the kind of gentle concern that felt more terrifying than outright alarm. That afternoon, curiosity finally overcame exhaustion. Sarah knocked on Mrs. Tanaka's door, expecting to hear about some expensive Japanese supplement or complicated routine. "Come in, dear." "I was just preparing tea," Mrs. Tanaka said, leading Sarah into a living room that felt like stepping into a different century. No clutter, no screens glowing in corners, just clean lines and the kind of quietude Sarah hadn't experienced since childhood. Mrs. Tanaka moved with deliberate slowness, each gesture economical but purposeful. She reached into a high cabinet, squatted smoothly to retrieve cups from below, her spine rotating naturally as she prepared the tea service. At 82, she moved like water, while Sarah, 3 decades younger, felt like rusted machinery. "You are always tired," Mrs. Tanaka observed, not unkindly. "I see you through the window, running, sweating, fighting your body like an enemy." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I just can't seem to lose weight no matter what I do. I exercise every day. I count calories." Mrs. Tanaka handed her a cup so small Sarah could close her fingers completely around it. The porcelain radiated warmth that seemed to travel up her arms and settle somewhere deep in her chest. "In Japan, we say the body knows its size when the mind stops shouting," Mrs. Tanaka said. "Your grandmother's bowl?" She gestured toward a cabinet where Sarah glimpsed a collection of small dishes, each one clearly old, well used, loved. "My grandmother left me some things," Sarah admitted. "I keep meaning to use them, but they're so small. I'd still be hungry." Mrs. Tanaka's eyes crinkled. "Hungry in your stomach, or hungry in your mind? Very different things." Walking back to her apartment that evening, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months, curiosity instead of desperation. She climbed the stairs to her storage unit and found the box she'd been avoiding since her grandmother's death 2 years earlier. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that still smelled faintly of jasmine, was a rice bowl so delicate it seemed to glow in her hands. Her grandmother had used this bowl every day for 60 years. Sarah remembered visiting as a child, watching the careful way her grandmother served rice, the way she would sit quietly before eating. the way she seemed satisfied by amounts that would barely qualify as a snack by American standards. Sarah held the bowl up to the kitchen light, tracing the hairline crack along one edge with her finger. Such a tiny thing to carry so much weight. If you've ever felt tired even after a full night of sleep, or frustrated with diets that don't last, tell us in the comments which part of this story feels familiar, and stay with us for the next chapters. The next morning, Sarah found herself standing in her kitchen at 6 a.m., holding her grandmother's rice bowl and feeling slightly ridiculous. She'd impulsively cooked brown rice the night before, something she hadn't done in years since rice was bad carbs, according to her latest eating plan. The bowl held exactly 3/4 of a cup. In her regular dinner plates, this would look like a sad afterthought, but contained within the delicate ceramic walls, the rice looked complete, sufficient, like a small meditation. Mrs. Tanaka had mentioned eating the largest meal before 9 a.m., which contradicted everything Sarah had read about intermittent fasting. But standing in her kitchen, holding the warm bowl in both hands, she felt compelled to try. She added steamed vegetables and a piece of grilled salmon left over from Sunday's meal prep, arranging everything with more care than she'd given food in months. Eating while standing felt wrong with the precious bowl, so Sarah sat at her small table, something she hadn't done for breakfast in years. Without her phone, without the news cycling through its daily catastrophes, she became aware of sounds she'd forgotten existed. Birds outside her window, the soft click of chopsticks against ceramic, her own breathing. The strangest thing happened around bite 15. The urgency that usually drove her eating, the sense that she needed to hurry, to consume, to fill some nameless void, began to quiet. She found herself chewing slowly, not because some diet plan demanded it, but because the food actually had flavors worth noticing. 20 minutes later, she felt satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with fullness. Not stuffed, not deprived, but complete. At work, her colleague Jessica noticed immediately, "You look different. Did you get Botox?" "I ate breakfast sitting down," Sarah said, then immediately felt embarrassed by how California wellness it sounded. Jessica laughed. "What's next? Meditation and crystals? You know what actually works? I just started this new program where you eat 800 calories for 2 weeks to reset your metabolism." Sarah found herself defending something she didn't quite understand yet. "I think I'm trying the opposite approach." Good luck with that," Jessica said, unwrapping a protein bar that looked like compressed cardboard. "Let me know how it goes when you've gained 10 pounds. That afternoon, Sarah stopped by Mrs. Tanaka's garden again. The older woman was tending to a small patch of vegetables, moving through tasks with the same unhurried efficiency Sarah had noticed the day before. "How was the bowl?" Mrs. Tanaka asked, without looking up from her tomatoes. "Smaller than I expected, but I wasn't hungry after." "The stomach is the size of 2 fists, Mrs. Tanaka said, holding up her hands. "But the eyes, the mind, they want enough for 10 stomachs. She showed Sarah how she structured her day. The largest meal in the morning when digestion was strongest, smaller portions throughout the day, dinner finished by 7 p.m. Every 2 hours she would move through her house, reaching for things stored high and low, squatting to tend plants, stretching to hang laundry. In Japan, we call it natural movement. No gym, but the body stays awake all day. Sarah thought about her own routine, sitting in traffic, sitting at her desk, sitting in spin class, sitting on her couch. Even her exercise was just more sitting, pedaling nowhere. "I have to work late most nights," Sarah said. "I usually eat dinner around 9 or 10. Mrs. Tanaka nodded thoughtfully. "The body has a clock. When we eat late, we tell the clock to stay confused." That week, Sarah began experimenting. She started eating her largest meal in the morning, using only her grandmother's bowl and a few matching small plates she found in the same box. At first, the portions looked absurd, like dollhouse food. But as the days passed, Something shifted in her relationship with hunger. The constant low-level anxiety about food, when to eat, what to avoid, how much was too much, began to fade. Instead of fighting her appetite, she found herself simply satisfied. Her afternoon energy crashes disappeared. She stopped reaching for caffeine at 3 p.m. Most surprisingly, her clothes started fitting differently. Not dramatically, not in the sudden way of crash diets, but gradually, like her body was quietly rearranging itself. On Friday evening, instead of collapsing on her couch with takeout, she found herself moving around her apartment, organizing books, watering plants she'd been neglecting, stretching muscles that felt less tight than they had in months. Mrs. Tanaka was right. The body did know its size. Sarah was just beginning to remember how to listen. 3 weeks later, Sarah's doctor looked genuinely puzzled as she reviewed the lab results. "Your inflammatory markers are down significantly," Dr. Rodriguez said, flipping through the chart. "And you've lost 8 pounds, but your muscle mass actually increased. What have you been doing differently?" Sarah hesitated, knowing how it would sound. "I've been eating more in the morning, less at night, using smaller plates, moving around more throughout the day." That's surprisingly traditional advice. "Are you working with a nutritionist?" "My elderly Japanese neighbor," Sarah admitted. Dr. Rodriguez smiled. "Well, whatever she's teaching you, keep doing it. Your cortisol levels are the best I've seen them in 2 years." But success brought its own complications. At work, Sarah's new habits created friction with the startup's always-on culture. She'd started declining late dinner meetings, explaining she ate before 7 p.m. Her manager, Brad, seemed personally offended by this boundary. "We're trying to close the biggest deal in company history, and you're worried about your bedtime," he said during a team meeting that had stretched past 9. "This is exactly why women don't advance in tech. Too many personal limitations." Sarah felt the familiar knot of anxiety form in her stomach. The old Sarah would have ordered pizza, stayed until midnight, and spent the weekend recovering from the guilt and exhaustion. But sitting there, she found herself considering a different response. "I'm actually more productive when I maintain my routine," she said quietly. "I can stay focused on the presentation, but I'll work on it from home." The room fell silent. Jessica gave her a look that mixed admiration with concern, as if Sarah had just volunteered for a dangerous mission. At home that night, Sarah prepared her evening meal with particular care. Miso soup, steamed vegetables, a small piece of fish. She ate slowly, sitting at her table, watching the light fade outside her window. Instead of feeling anxious about the work waiting on her laptop, she felt centered, ready. She worked until 10 p.m., 2 hours longer than usual, but with a focus that surprised her. Without the fog of a heavy dinner, without the crash from late-day caffeine, her mind felt clear, efficient. The presentation was finished by the time her neighbors were finally settling into bed. Mrs. Tanaka noticed the change immediately when they met in the hallway the next morning. "You look younger," she said simply. "I feel different," Sarah admitted. "But I think I'm making people at work uncomfortable." "When you change, it holds a mirror to others," Mrs. Tanaka said. "Some people don't like what they see." They walked together to the local farmers' market, something Sarah had never had time for before. Mrs. Tanaka moved through the stalls with the focus of a curator, selecting vegetables with the kind of attention Sarah usually reserved for important emails. "In Okinawa, where my grandmother lived, people say hara hachi bu." Mrs. Tanaka explained, weighing a small eggplant in her hands. "Eat until you are 80% full. Leave space for the body to breathe." Sarah watched Mrs. Tanaka choose perfect portions, enough for several meals, but nothing excess, nothing that would overwhelm her small refrigerator or require frantic consumption before spoiling. "How do you know when you're 80% full?" Sarah asked. "When you could eat more, but don't want to," Mrs. Tanaka said. Americans eat until they can't. Japanese eat until they can. That afternoon, Sarah realized she'd been unconsciously applying this principle for weeks. The desperate edge to her hunger had softened into something more like curiosity. Food had become fuel rather than medicine for exhaustion, anxiety, boredom. Her grandmother's bowl sat on her counter, no longer precious and untouchable, but daily, reliable, honest. Each meal had become a small ritual of attention rather than a battle to be won or lost. Even her reflection in the mirror had changed. Not just her waist, which was visibly smaller, but her posture, her skin, the way she held her shoulders. She looked like someone who slept well, who moved without pain, who had energy left at the end of the day. But the most profound change was internal. The constant background noise of food anxiety, what to eat, when to eat, how much was too much, had quieted to almost nothing. In its place was something she'd forgotten existed: trust in her own body's wisdom. Would you rather force yourself with willpower, or redesign your environment and habits like this character is learning to do? Comment which path makes more sense to you, and share this episode with someone who needs a gentler approach to change. 2 months into her new routine, Sarah faced her first real test. The company's biggest client was flying in from Tokyo for a week-long intensive, requiring 12-hour days and elaborate dinner meetings. The old Sarah would have seen this as license to abandon all healthy habits, ordering takeout at midnight and surviving on energy drinks. But as she prepared for the week, Sarah found herself thinking strategically rather than defensively. She packed her grandmother's bowl in her work bag, along with chopsticks and small containers for portioning restaurant meals. She scheduled movement breaks between meetings, even if it meant walking laps around the building. The first dinner meeting was at an upscale Japanese restaurant in downtown San Francisco. As the group settled in for what would clearly be a 3-hour marathon of courses and sake, Sarah felt a familiar panic rising. How could she maintain her eating schedule without seeming unprofessional? Then she noticed their client, Mr. Yamamoto, eating with the same deliberate attention Mrs. Tanaka had taught her. Small portions, slow bites, long pauses between courses. When the server offered him a third helping of tempura, he smiled and declined. In Japan, we have saying, he mentioned to the table, hara hachibu, eat until 80% full, leaves energy for clear thinking. Sarah met his eyes across the table and nodded slightly. Without making a show of it, she began following his lead, taking smaller portions, chewing slowly, participating fully in the business conversation while honoring her body's signals. Brad, who had been drinking heavily and eating with aggressive enthusiasm, looked increasingly sluggish as the evening progressed. His presentations the next day were scattered, his energy flagging by afternoon. Sarah, meanwhile, felt clear and focused throughout the intense week. Her stomach remained comfortable, her sleep undisturbed, her mind sharp during crucial negotiations. On the final day, Mr. Yamamoto approached her during a break. "You understand Japanese eating wisdom," he said quietly, "very rare in American business people." "I'm learning from my neighbor, Mrs. Tanaka," Sarah replied. "Tanaka-san is good teacher. In Tokyo, we see many executives your age who are very tired, very sick from Western habits, but you seem to have balance." That evening, the deal closed successfully. During the celebration, Brad grudgingly acknowledged Sarah's contributions. Though his praise felt hollow given his earlier criticism, Jessica cornered Sarah in the bathroom afterward. "I don't know what you're doing differently, but you look amazing. And you've been so calm all week." "Are you on medication or something?" Sarah laughed. "I'm eating rice out of my grandmother's bowl and going to bed early." "That's it? No supplements, no trainer, no diet plan? Just smaller portions, better timing, more movement throughout the day?" Jessica looked skeptical. It can't be that simple. But it was that simple, and that complicated. Simple because the habits themselves were unremarkable. Eat breakfast like a queen, lunch like a princess, dinner like a pauper. Use small dishes. Move naturally throughout the day. Sleep when the sun sets, wake when it rises. Pay attention to hunger and satisfaction rather than external rules. Complicated because it required swimming against the cultural current of more, faster, harder. It meant declining invitations that would disrupt her rhythm, explaining her choices to people who saw them as personal judgments, trusting her body's wisdom over expert opinions and marketing messages. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment, looking at her grandmother's bowl. The hairline crack seemed less noticeable now, or maybe she'd grown to see it as character rather than flaw. She thought about her grandmother, who had lived to 94, remaining sharp and independent until her final months. Had her grandmother known she was teaching metabolic wisdom with this simple bowl? Had she understood that portion control wasn't about deprivation, but about clarity, respect, attention? Sarah filled the bowl with rice and vegetables, eating slowly as the city settled into darkness below. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new temptations to abandon the quiet rhythm she'd built. But tonight, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Trust in her own body, faith in her own choices, peace with her own appetite. The bowl sat empty on her table, not demanding to be filled again, not leaving her hungry for more. Just, complete, sufficient, honest. 6 months after that first conversation with Mrs. Tanaka, Sarah stood in Dr. Rodriguez's office holding a lab report that seemed too good to be true. Her inflammatory markers were in the optimal range. Her metabolic markers had normalized. She'd lost 22 pounds without counting a single calorie. "I have to ask," Dr. Rodriguez said, "what program are you following? I'd like to recommend it to other patients." Sarah hesitated, trying to find words for something that felt too simple to be revolutionary. "I eat from smaller dishes. I finish dinner by 7. I move throughout the day instead of exercising in chunks. I sleep better because I'm not digesting food all night." "Doctor?" Rodriguez looked puzzled. "That's very basic advice. Nothing cutting edge?" "Nothing cutting edge," Sarah confirmed. The secret, she realized, wasn't in the habits themselves. The secret was in understanding that she'd been fighting the wrong war. For years, she'd battled her appetite, her cravings, her body's natural rhythms, believing that health required constant vigilance and self-denial. But Mrs. Tanaka's approach was different. Instead of fighting her body, she'd learned to design an environment where healthy choices became automatic. Small plates made appropriate portions look satisfying. Early dinners aligned with her natural circadian rhythms. Regular movement kept her metabolism steady throughout the day. The real transformation wasn't physical, it was psychological. She'd stopped seeing food as enemy or reward and started seeing it as fuel. She'd stopped treating her body like a machine to be dominated and started treating it like a garden to be tended. That evening, Sarah found Mrs. Tanaka in her garden, as usual. "I never thanked you properly," Sarah said. "You probably saved my life." Mrs. Tanaka smiled, continuing to water her tomatoes. "I only reminded you what your grandmother already taught you. The bowl was there all along. Why don't more people know this? Why isn't this taught in schools?" Mrs. Tanaka paused, considering. "In Japan, we learn this as children, but in America you want solutions that feel like work. If it's not difficult, not expensive, not complicated, you don't trust it." Sarah nodded, thinking about all the programs she'd tried, the money she'd spent seeking some external solution to problems that could only be solved from within. "Also," Mrs. Tanaka added gently, "you have to want peace more than you want to be right about being broken." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. How long had she been attached to the story of being someone who couldn't lose weight, who had no willpower, who was just built differently? Those stories had become part of her identity, and changing them meant changing how she saw herself. I think I was afraid that if I stopped struggling, I'd stop caring, Sarah admitted. Struggle and care are not the same thing, Mrs. Tanaka said. You can care for your body with the same attention you give to precious things, not with violence. That night, Sarah sat with her grandmother's bowl, understanding finally why it had been passed down through generations. It wasn't just a dish. It was a philosophy about enough, about satisfaction, about treating meals as opportunities for mindfulness rather than battles to be won. She thought about the morning 6 months ago when she'd felt trapped in a body that seemed determined to betray her. Now, looking in the mirror, she saw someone who looked rested, energized, at home in her own skin. But the most profound change was invisible. She'd stopped being afraid of her own appetite. The constant background anxiety about food had been replaced by a quiet confidence in her body's wisdom. She knew when she was hungry and when she was satisfied. She could enjoy food without guilt or desperation. The secret hadn't been in any special ingredient or complicated protocol. The secret had been in returning to the simple wisdom her grandmother had lived every day. Eat mindfully, move naturally, rest completely, trust the body's innate intelligence. As she prepared for bed, Sarah placed the bowl in its usual spot, ready for tomorrow's quiet ritual. The crack along the edge caught the lamplight, beautiful in its imperfection, stronger for having been broken and continuing to serve. 1 year later, Sarah's life looked remarkably similar from the outside. Same job, same apartment, same daily responsibilities, but the quality of her days had transformed completely. She woke naturally around sunrise, no longer needing multiple alarms. Her morning routine centered around preparing breakfast with the care of a meditation. Rice measured into her grandmother's bowl, vegetables arranged with attention to color and texture, tea steeped to the precise temperature that brought out its subtle flavors. At work, her colleagues had stopped commenting on her weird eating habits. Her productivity had improved so dramatically that Brad, despite his earlier resistance, had privately asked her to share her optimization strategies with the team. Jessica had started bringing smaller plates to the office cafeteria and asking Sarah questions about Japanese eating customs. She'd even bought her own set of chopsticks, joking that they forced her to slow down. Mrs. Tanaka remained Sarah's most important teacher, though their relationship had evolved into genuine friendship. They shopped for vegetables together on Saturday mornings, shared quiet conversations over tea, and practiced the kind of natural movement that kept both their bodies supple and strong. "You move differently now," Mrs. Tanaka observed one afternoon as Sarah helped tend her garden. "Like someone who trusts her own body." Sarah paused, feeling the truth of that statement. The hypervigilance about food, exercise, and weight had been replaced by an easy confidence in her body's signals. She ate when hungry, stopped when satisfied, moved for pleasure rather than punishment. The scale had become irrelevant. Her body had found its natural size, not the smallest possible version of herself, but the healthiest, most sustainable one. Her clothes fit comfortably, her energy remained steady throughout the day, and her sleep was deep and restorative. But the most significant change was psychological. The constant internal critic that had once monitored every bite, every workout, every glimpse in the mirror had finally gone quiet. In its place was something she'd forgotten was possible: self-trust. Dr. Rodriguez had become fascinated by Sarah's transformation, particularly how sustainable it seemed compared to her previous diet attempts. "Most people can lose weight," the doctor had said during Sarah's latest checkup. "But you've changed your relationship with food entirely. That's much rarer." Sarah knew the difference. Previous diets had been acts of aggression against her body. This approach was an act of collaboration with it. Instead of fighting her appetite, she'd learned to listen to it. Instead of imposing arbitrary rules, she'd discovered the rhythms that made her feel most alive. On quiet evenings, Sarah would hold her grandmother's bowl and think about the wisdom embedded in such a simple object. Portion control without deprivation, mindfulness without obsession, tradition without rigidity. She'd started teaching the principles to friends who asked, sharing Mrs. Tanaka's insights about eating until 80% full, moving naturally throughout the day, aligning meals with circadian rhythms. But she'd learned that the information was only useful to people who were ready to stop fighting their bodies and start listening to them. The crack in the bowl had become her favorite detail, proof that something could be broken and still be beautiful, still be functional, still serve its essential purpose. Like trust in one's body, it could be damaged by years of criticism and control, but given patience and care, it could be restored. As spring arrived in San Francisco, Sarah noticed cherry blossoms blooming outside her window. She remembered the previous spring when she'd been too exhausted and anxious to appreciate such simple beauty. Now, sitting with her evening tea, she felt grateful for the journey that had brought her back to herself. Mrs. Tanaka was right. The body knew its size when the mind stopped shouting. Sarah had learned to whisper instead. Gentle requests rather than harsh demands, suggestions rather than ultimatums, trust rather than control. The bowl sat empty on her table, complete in its simplicity, sufficient in its purpose, beautiful in its imperfection. Tomorrow it would be filled again, part of a ritual that had become as natural as breathing, as essential as sleep, as sustainable as love. If this story reminded you that real transformation comes from small habits repeated over time, not from overnight fixes, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to start this journey with you in the next story.